serve two audiences. The first audience, where the press secretary office is, I'm 50 yards from the Oval Office. I'm also 50 yards from the press briefing room. And I serve both the president and the American public. And we were very careful to be truthful and to, always have the trust of the media and the trust of the president and the senior leadership within the White House.
What did that feel like to you? Like, what does that feel like when you're, briefing the president, when you're having these conversations, when right down, a 20-second walk is the Oval Office?
It was heady. I mean, I was in my 30s, and I feel like if I knew then what I know now, I probably should have been more scared and nervous.
So welcome to the Academy podcast, and our guest today is Amy Weiss. Amy is a communicator extraordinaire and someone I'm very happy to call a friend. So I'm excited to have Amy today. She has helped shape the voices of the world, the presidents, the United Nations, well-known cultural icons like the NFL and Ted Turner's network and his philanthropy, the American Airlines, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get into all of those things a little bit later. But one of the things, Amy, and I'll let you speak in just a second here, but one of the things that I think is fascinating about you is, in addition to all the things you've accomplished and the contributions you've made, you are a wonderful human being. And I mean that sincerely. It's from the very first time we met, that's been very, very clear. And your values that you have and ethics that you hold, I think, are really important. And we're going to talk about that because you certainly have had an opportunity to bend those ethics, and you haven't done them along the way. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is that you understand well that one of the most powerful things that you can do is deliver a message that matters, and especially in this noisy world that we're in right now. So we're going to go behind the podium and into the heart and life of Amy Weiss. I am very excited about this. You have a life, from my perspective, that's built on clarity, courage, and conviction. And Amy Weiss, we are very excited to have you. So thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. We met 3 years ago, and
yeah,
we immediately had a bond, and I'm just thrilled to be on your podcast. You've really taken it to the next level, and it's a delight to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. So of all your accolades, everything, there's one that stands out to me that I really want to start off with. And if you can go back with me to 1978, where you won the Camper of the Year award at your summer camp. Tell me about that. Who was that little girl?
That little girl was in Pine Bush, New York, where I went to summer camp for 2 months every summer. That was the thing my parents did, sent us away to camp, and we loved it. And my brother, who's 16 months older than I am, was Camper of the Year 2 years prior. So I was always jealous of that.
Yeah, family legacy.
Yes, we are. The Weisses are strong when it comes to camp. And so I was thrilled to get the award, and camp is sort of one of those defining things. I feel like it's an East Coast thing, where a lot of kids just go away to summer camp, where I learned how to make gimps in God's eyes and swim all day and be in a canoe, and it was wonderful.
So I did not go to summer camp, but there were people, I grew up in Texas, and there were people that would go to summer camp as well. And it was, I think it was a life-changing experience for them, the things that they had experienced in those situations. Was there anything during that time, like when you look at that little girl in 1978, was there anything in there that you see as a thread that you've continued through your whole life? And by the way, also, just in general, what does it take to be Camper of the Year?
Well, I'm also a middle child, so I have this desire to always be a people pleaser and make everybody happy. So I think that's part of it. Being a good team player is one of the things I learned at camp. When you're in a bunk house with 15 girls for 2 months, you learn a lot and you need to get along with everybody. And it was, I think that camaraderie sort of has helped me be a better team player throughout my life. I no longer make macrame, but if I needed to, I could, make a macrame plant holder and sell it if things get tough. So
So
that was
this is really interesting because the roles that you've had, most of them, not all of them, but most of the roles that you've had have been exactly that, a team player, someone who's behind the scenes for the most part. And being a middle child, learning those skills, being rewarded for those skills even early on. It's fascinating to me, isn't it, how we have these sort of seminal moments at some point in our life that play out for the rest of our life.
right. Yeah, and I think I'm not a limelight seeker. I don't do a lot of press. My job, I see my role as putting out my client or my principal to get the accolades and to be out front. And so for me, that is also part of it is I don't seek awards. There's organizations or companies where you can sort of pay to play, and it's just not something I've sought. I felt 12 was like a good time to peak. And,
That was it. It's no longer standing at the front. Now you're going to move to the back. Yeah, it's been interesting actually. When we originally started talking about you being on the podcast, you were hesitant about it, and just because that's not your thing right anymore. At the time, by the way, I didn't know about the summer camp award, but I would have used that to get you here. But yeah, it's really interesting. And do you think that there is, like, just in general, is this something that is inherent in who you are? Did you learn it? Where did this come from?
about being behind the scenes.
Yeah, and being in support. I just had this conversation yesterday with someone as well that there is such a huge value to people who that's their place of contribution. Not everybody, their place of contribution is up front. And they're different contributions. They're not better or worse. And so, yeah, I mean, why is that the comfortable place for you?
I always felt that, when I started in communications and public relations and working for principals, my job was to literally stay behind the camera. And I always knew that was the best thing I could offer a principal was to prep them, get them ready, have them feel comfortable in front of a camera, but not be seen. And so I've never been one to, think about, oh, I'm going to write a book about my life. I'm going to do a kiss and tell kind of thing. Other people have done that, and I don't judge them on it. It's just I feel that the confidentiality you have with a principal or a client is paramount. And so for me, my role is to sort of stay quietly behind the scenes and make other people the star of the show.
Yeah, well, and as we'll talk about, you've done that in a remarkable way. There seems to be a freedom to that as well. Do you think so?
I do. I think there's freedom because you're trusted by your clients that what's happening is not going to end up, out there publicly. So I feel emboldened when I give clients advice, and I think they feel emboldened to take the advice
Mhm.
from a place of caringness and passion and confidentiality.
Do you think, like, to me, you've been driven by purpose more than ambition. So kind of the topic that we're talking about here. Um, First of all, do you think that's true? And then secondly, what is it about that purpose, that central purpose that you have that helps you do what you do?
Well, I've been lucky in my life that I've been able to do work that I love and feel like I'm giving back. And I've, my first campaign, I worked for our local congressman. My mother, for some reason, dragged me along to do literature drops in Linden, New Jersey, where my siblings didn't have to do that. And they're both in medicine. I'm the only one that didn't end up in medicine. But I do believe that because I come from a family of doctors and nurses, my sister's a nurse, my brother's a doctor, my dad was a surgeon. My mother was a Jewish mother who was always thinking she was a doctor. I always felt that I needed to give back the way they were giving back. And so I watched my dad give back by working at Harlem Hospital, working in an inner city hospital in New Jersey, working with people who couldn't afford health care. He would go and, work at those hospitals. And so it was always very much embedded in us growing up that giving back was very important.
You said you're not in medicine, but we're going to talk a little bit later where you've got a significant role in medicine. So let's fast forward a little bit and give perspective, right? We're not talking about little jobs here and there. We're talking about, for example, you serving the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, as the Deputy Press Secretary. Can you talk a little bit about that as one of the many things that you've done?
Yes, I was honored to work in the White House as President Clinton's Deputy Press Secretary in the second term. I had interned at the Democratic National Committee in 1987. And one of the things I did was work. I went to different departments within the DNC to see how I could help. And one of the departments I really loved working with was the press office. And the press secretary at the time at the Democratic Party was a guy named Mike McCurry. Fast forward 10 years later, Mike McCurry is now the White House press secretary. And Mike called and asked me to come in and interview to be his chief of staff and be a deputy press secretary. And had I not been sort of an eager beaver intern, I never would have met him. We never would have connected and clicked, and I never would have ended up in the White House. And part of my job there was prepping the president for press conferences. And so I got a real eagle eye ringside seat to history. It was an honor to work there.
I like the fact that you said that eagle eye to history, because that's not really a job. That is watching history unfold in real time. And in particular with that president, I've had the good fortune to meet President Clinton, and in that meeting, regardless of where you stand politically, wow, he's an impressive guy. Like, I felt like I was the only one in the universe when we were talking.
He's amazing. He has a photographic memory. I was prepping him once for an interview, and my job was not to be the subject matter expert. My job was to get the subject matter experts in the room, making sure that he was prepared. And I was preparing him for a New York Times interview on weapons of mass destruction. And as I had the different, senior leaders coming into the Oval Office to prep him, he's literally doing the New York Times crossword puzzle. And I am panicked, thinking, this is going to go sideways. We're going to end up in World War III. And so I then got the reporter on the line, and he did the interview and knocked it out of the park. He knew more than anybody that had walked in and briefed him. He had read all the documents the night before. He had memorized, internalized everything. And he is just an incredible, brilliant human being.
So, I got to say, it's going to be World War III. That's not a throwaway statement when you're talking about the President of the United States, right? It's incredible to me, and you have been able to hold on to the truth and help others do that as well through it. With that volume of information and that level of high stakes game, if you will, how do you do that?
Well, I never lie. That's a good start. Mike McCurry, when he was press secretary, said to us, his deputies, and the others in the press office, my job is I serve two audiences. The first audience, where the press secretary office is, I'm 50 yards from the Oval Office. I'm also 50 yards from the press briefing room. And I serve both the president and the American public. And we were very careful to be truthful, and to, always have the trust of the media and the trust of the president and the senior leadership within the White House.
What did that feel like to you? Like, what does that feel like when you're, briefing the president, when you're having these conversations, when right down, a 20-second walk is the Oval Office?
It was heady. I mean, I was in my 30s, and I feel like if I knew then what I know now, I probably should have been more scared and nervous. The first time I briefed at the White House, when you stand in front of the podium and talk to the media, I was literally told what you say could start a war. And so you have to be buttoned up, buttoned down, and know your topics. And at least they used to have a notebook in front of you, and it had from A to Z. So it was, Albania to zoology. And somebody would ask you a question, and you'd flip to that letter, and you'd find the guidance on that topic. And it's okay to say, we'll need to get back to you, so you don't say something that's incorrect. But it was exciting. It was very exciting.
Yeah, I bet. So, okay, if you knew then what you know now, what would be different?
I think now I would have been a better manager. One of the things I was in charge of was managing the press operation, as well as the regional press operation for the White House. And I think managing 30 people, I just think I'm more mature now than I was back then. I think I would have taken advantage of more things working at the White House. I mean, there are times I was invited to things like going to watch a movie in the White House theater after a long day on the road. And, I said to the president, I'm going to go home.
That's crazy to think about now, isn't it? No, Mr. President, I don't feel like going to the White House movie theater.
You guys go.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So looking back, I would have done more.
It's so we're going to come back to this because I think it's a really important topic of how you really reap the moment, right? How you, I had a friend that always used to say, be where your feet are, right?
Mm-hmm.
That level of being very present and get everything you can out of the experience. I just recently had the opportunity to train with Navy SEAL, and one of the things that was very, very exciting and instructive in that was the idea of being present and getting everything you can get out of the situation, getting what, actually more accurately, getting what you needed to get out of the situation. And as we get older, we still have lessons in front of us like that.
Right.
So, Amy, okay, White House, but there's also United Nations, there's the NFL, there's, all of these different areas that are, right behind you, you've got The Sopranos and a gold record, and you've had so many of these experiences. I want you to talk about those in just a second. But, the old saying that power corrupts, but you haven't been corrupted through this. How do you do that?
I try to stay grounded. My son keeps me very grounded. And I, sort of love what I do, and I don't let it get to my head. I think some people don't sort of see the value in the work that they're doing. And I don't see what I do as a job. I see it as a career and something I love doing. I love waking up every morning and knowing I'm going to have an exciting day, no matter what I'm doing. The jobs that I've had over the years have all happened pretty much by happenstance, happened to be at the right place at the right time, or having known the right person who's helped me. So I feel like I've just been very lucky.
I will push back a little bit on that. It wasn't just being in the right place at the right time. I mean, you have to do the quality of work that you do to be able to do it. And one of the interesting things to me is it's across industries, right? So we could go from the White House to the UN and sort of say, oh, there's a natural tie there, but then the NFL, then the, American Airlines, and then let's talk about The Sopranos, right? And the plaques that you have on your wall, like, how do you first of all, let's hear a little bit about your work in the industry, and then how do you get to there? And then the next, sorry, I'm so excited about this. I just have all these questions I want to ask you. The follow-up to that is, what's common across those industries?
I worked at the Recording Industry Association of America, which is a trade association for the record companies. And I need to go back to college when I convinced my parents to let me study in London for a semester, not because I thought I'd get a great education, but because I really wanted to go to Liverpool and go to Abbey Road. And so they, fell for it and let me go to study in London. And I did get to Liverpool, although I did learn a few things as well. I did study. And then I was a DJ in college and was general manager of our radio station and DJ'd every Tuesday night at the tavern. I went to American University and we had tavern night. And back then the drinking age was 18 in Washington. And it was like a big night out where everyone would come and you'd go dancing in the tavern. And I was the disc jockey for the...
Can I just ask you about that? Because disc jockey is kind of an interesting position because you're both out front and behind the scenes at the same time.
Right. Good point. I mean, I wasn't, you watch now like in clubs where there's a DJ and they're like talking and doing this and that. I mean, I just like literally played records, kept my head down, and I say records, I mean records, vinyl. When I was a DJ on the radio, I guess I was out front, but I didn't feel like I was. And I had, so that was sort of the beginning of my music career. And then, but I thought I wanted to be a DJ. So when I was in college, that was my dream. And a professor told me that wasn't a career. I could not be a DJ. And so anyway, that all switched up. And then, so fast forward years later, the Recording Industry Association was looking for someone to come in and be their head of communications. And I arrived in 99, I believe. And the day I started was the day we filed a lawsuit against this little website called Napster. And for those that don't remember Napster, it was a site where you could illegally download music. It was the beginning of the end of the album and CDs and sort of the physical music that people love to buy. The industry had not yet launched legal services. I mean, we were literally on the phone with Steve Jobs trying to get him to launch iTunes because it hadn't launched yet. And so it was a very interesting time within the industry. So that was a very long answer to not I don't think, what was your question?
Yeah, no, there are no long answers for you, Amy. I love it because, you unveil these little Easter eggs like, oh yeah, we were on the phone with Steve Jobs, right? Okay, tell me about being on the phone with Steve Jobs.
So it was my boss, Hillary Rosen, who, as we were suing people for stealing music, we had no legal alternative. And so Hillary called Jobs to say, like, I need you to, hurry up, launch this site that you say you're going to launch. And so they, sort of help push the legal websites so there could be music downloading rather than just the illegal sites where people were obviously hungry to get singles.
So I noticed the Beatles back there, Abbey Road, and the others, how did these come about? The awards that are on your wall there.
So the big one behind me is Pete Yorn, who's an incredibly talented guitarist who's originally from New Jersey. And I just heard him for the first time in a little bookstore down underneath the offices we were working out of. And when his record went gold, the guy who ran the Gold and Platinum program at the RIAA gave me one of the gold records. And then when I left the RIAA, they gave me the Sopranos gold record because I'm from New Jersey, and I guess they think I acted like a mobster.
The Jersey girl. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so across industries, what's in common and what's significantly different as far as your work is concerned?
Obviously there's different languages you use from industry to industry. There's different audiences that you're targeting. There's different issues and challenges. But the thing that remains the same is the need to educate the public on the work you're trying to do. So whether it's educating the public on how stealing music hurts artists and songwriters and everybody else behind the music, and how do you humanize that, and how do you put a face on those people that are being hurt by music piracy. The same thing can be said, within the NFL. And I work for the NFL Physician Society, and one of the things I work to do is to put, and there's a team that I work with, putting a human face on the team behind the team, the physicians, the athletic trainers, the cardiologists, the whole team behind the NFL club, to show sort of the complexity of those who are making what seems like just a football game happen, that there's a whole host of people that make that happen.
I want to get into this more in a little bit, because it's really between you and Dr. Navdeep Singh, who's a mutual friend, super person, and others, I've been really educated on what happens in the NFL, and it's very different than what I would have thought. So I'd like to talk about that some more. But before we get there, there's one piece that sort of has come up a couple of times, and I'm wondering if you can tie this string together, this red thread. So the Camper Award that we talked about, later you were a DJ, wanted to be a DJ. You didn't. There are these places where, as a press secretary, deputy press secretary, like you said, you're the one who walks into the room and addresses the audience in the beginning. It's interesting to me because you've never been a person that seeked the limelight, but it's not that you don't seem uncomfortable in the limelight if it's part of your job.
Right. If I have to do it, I will do it. I like to lift up others. I feel like that's my job, is to lift others and not to lift myself. This is not about my ego or my airtime. It's about making other people look good.
I heard a podcast that you did one time about communication with physicians, and one of the many areas where you have helped in medicine. And you talked about the authenticity and clarity that the person needs to have in that conversation. We're going to talk a little bit later about specific suggestions that you have to be authentic and clear in the communication, but across those industries, they seem like very different industries, right? The record industry and governmental organizations and high-profile brands and so forth. Work certainly not at the same level as you, but working across industries, I've seen that there have been commonalities across the industries as far as how people are successful. What are the things that you would say are kind of the major things that you see across the industries where people are or are not successful because they do X?
I think people are not successful in different industries when they put themselves first before the organizations that they're working for. I think that looking at, you asked the differences between, or the similarities between all of these different industries that I've been involved with, or governmental, whether I also worked on Capitol Hill for a congressman. When I worked at the United Nations Foundation that was founded by Ted Turner, all of these things have something in common, which is the people behind the scenes. And the more the public sees and meets and understands the people behind the scenes, the more they can understand and relate to what each organization or company or group is trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I think that idea of being mission driven is so important. It's, as I think about this relative to, for example, athletes who are very good about being process committed instead of outcome committed typically become very successful, or at least they increase their likelihood of being successful. Those who are outcome committed, there's much more variability in there. And so I think like what you're saying, being mission driven is essentially being process driven, right? It's how do we make decisions and generate responses and move in a way that serves the mission of what we have. It's actually really interesting to hear you say that, because it makes a lot of sense. I don't know that I would have thought about it before you just said that.
I mean, that's certainly the way I look at life. And I think being part of a mission, being part of a team, going back to Indian Springs Camp, I think benefits everybody and really changes the dynamic of and the outcome of what you're looking to achieve.
You made this point earlier, being a middle child, being in that situation where you are the peacekeeper to some extent as well. It's like I said before, it's fascinating to me how we have these sort of seminal experiences that somewhere along our life that start to dictate what we do. In your case, in a good way, and in some cases, not so much. And I've always found it fascinating that we learn sort of the rules of the world when we're very young. And then a lot of times we carry those rules with us for the rest of our lives. And if they're good rules, that's a good thing. And if they're bad rules, that's a bad thing, right? And so being able to do what you do and have sort of started that early on becomes really interesting. And then taking those forays out to, being a DJ and standing in front of the audience at the White House, and those sort of like dipping your toe into those other areas as well. Yeah, I mean, it's just been fantastic. And I'm going to ask you, by the way, at the end of a summary of people like Ted Turner and Bill Clinton and those, because, certainly I don't know those people, but what I know of them is fascinating. But you've certainly got some more insights. So that's going to be a bonus towards the end here. One of the things I love about what you do, but don't quite understand how you find the time to do it, is you also work with philanthropic agencies and so forth. The National Museum of Women in Arts is one of the areas. Can you talk about the work that you do there, not specifically with women in arts, but some of the charity work that you do as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the National Museum of Women in the Arts is based in Washington, D.C. I've been on their board of trustees for now 12 years. It is the only museum in the world dedicated to women artists, full stop, and which is shocking to think about. And the majority of art hung in other museums is male, which is not a shock. And so I've been on their board. We just did a huge renovation. We work to educate people about women artists, help hopefully inspire young women who want to become artists. And it's just a really incredible and unfortunately unique museum. I mean, I hope that there will be 50 other museums dedicated to women artists in the near future, because it's pretty shocking that we are the only one.
What's the feel of when you walk into that museum versus you walk into, I don't know, the Met or something like that, right? A different museum that is more male dominated.
I think you're pretty overcome by every, description of the artwork, and the building itself and the museum itself is beautiful. It's actually used a lot for weddings and parties and receptions. But for me, it's overwhelming to see hundreds of pieces of art, all by women artists. And it's just a tribute to Wilhelmina Holiday, who started the museum almost 40 years ago. And she went to Europe and bought a painting by a woman artist, and suddenly realized how few women's art was displayed around the world. And so she took it as her mission in life to build and this incredible museum. So it gets emotional at times to think about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had not thought about it really until you brought it up. But you think about the sort of in the common nomenclature of, world-renowned artists. Most people will mention male artists for that, and in a variety of different art domains as well. Yeah, very, very interesting. So, but that's not your only work that you do pro bono. There's other areas as well.
I do. I also do pro bono work for an organization called the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law, and they work on behalf of plaintiffs who are suing different entities because they are fighting for mental health legal rights. Whether it's, one of the lawsuits they filed several years ago is against the Peace Corps, and there were Peace Corps volunteers who were kicked out of the Peace Corps because they had mental health issues and they needed either medication or wanted a virtual meeting with a psychiatrist and were summarily dismissed from the Peace Corps. So they work on cases like that on behalf of plaintiffs around the country. So they're always fighting for the rights of those who need help. And in a full circle, the woman who runs the organization, her name is Holly O'Donnell. Her dad was my second boss in Washington. And so her dad was a great mentor of mine. I worked at a think tank in town in Washington, and Kirk O'Donnell was the president. He took me under his wing. I was basically just out of college, and taught me how to do press, how to be a PR person, how to be a press secretary, how to leak stories without fingerprints. And anyway, so here we are, many years later, and I told Holly I'd be delighted to give back and volunteer for her. So,
okay, I need to ask you about that phrase, leak stories without fingerprints.
yes. So there are times when you want a story, and this is like sort of an old-fashioned thing because the whole world has turned upside down as when it comes to communications. But if you want a story placed, it's calling a reporter that building, because you've built relationships with reporters and you have a camaraderie and an understanding between you and the reporter, and you give them information that they might not have, and you say to them, either here's a document or here's information. You can go chase it and call the person who wrote the memo or who told me X, Y, and Z, but please don't use my name. And you don't know where you got it, but here you go. So that's how you leak without a fingerprint.
Okay, so not going to let you off the hook that easily. I want to know much more about this. And by the way, you also said the whole world has turned upside down relative to communication. So if you can put those together, like what exactly does that mean? And let's talk more about the fingerprints of communication.
So when I started in media and communications in the late 80s, you used a fax machine to get out press releases. You would call reporters and talk to them about your story. And today it's completely different. Today with social media, companies, individuals have their own newsrooms, really. They can bypass the national press and just put their news out themselves on social media, on their websites, through surrogates. And so it's no longer just faxing out a press release and hoping somebody picks it up. It's a much more complicated world trying to get your story out there and trying to break through all the clutter, because there's a whole lot of clutter. There used to be PBS, NBC, ABC News, and that was sort of the realm of the evening news and the newscasts. And so you would wait until 5, 6 o'clock to watch the evening news to see what was going to drive the next day's newspapers. And that is obviously no longer the case. I mean, when I worked at the White House in the 90s, we would give information to John King and Wolf Blitzer, who were the White House correspondents for CNN. They'd stand on on what we call Pebble Beach in front of the White House and break the news And that's how you would get it out. I would also rip the AP wire off of the wire machine and hand it to Mike McCurry so he could see what was coming over the AP wire. I mean, obviously, I feel like someone's great grandma talking about work on a horse. But and today, all you need to do is tweet something or, push something out on any of the multitude of platforms. I mean, I think, I don't want to get political, but you look at President Trump and his brilliant use of Truth Social to put out a press release, and really that, his little short statements, and that's how he breaks news. I mean, when we were at the White House, we would literally physically hand out press releases. I do not envy people that work in the White House now or in either side of the press right now, whether you're the communicator or the reporter. I mean, it's overwhelming how much information there is coming out at any given time.
I think about social media and the sort of the path of it over a relatively short period of time. And it seems like so you go back to, 3 channels that would talk about the news, and it was absolutely not a democratized news process, right? But now, so social media comes in with Twitter and so forth, primarily Twitter, I think, initially, and it became more democratized because it was individuals or groups that were saying whatever they were saying. But now it's used much more as a tool. And to your point, you've got entire, press rooms, if you will, that are behind it supporting. And so the pendulum seems to have been swinging the other way as well. And yeah, Trump, one of the things that he's done well, regardless of your political opinion about him, is he's used social media probably better than any president. I mean, that's from an naive observer, but what do you think about that?
I think you're absolutely right. I think he has leveraged social media and is able to both broadcast and narrowcast his messages brilliantly. And there's no filter, right? So in the old days, you would put out a press release and somebody would write up a story with other quotes. Now, and with other viewpoints. Now he just puts out a statement and they just read it. And obviously there's other voices that come in after that, but he sets the agenda, he sets the table, and then other people come in and comment. And so it's been fascinating to watch as somebody who had been there many, many years ago, to see sort of what their operation looks like.
Yeah, I mean, it's a new game. I mean, it's what you did from the press perspective versus now. I mean, it to some extent, it again, from a naive perspective, it feels a little bit like whack-a-mole,
Yeah.
that, yeah. Do you know the name John Haidt?
Mm-mm.
So John I was fortunate to meet him years ago when I worked at Zappos, and he wrote a book at the time called The Happiness Hypothesis. His most recent book is called The Anxious Generation. And just prior to that, his book that he with co-author was oh my goodness, I'll need to think of the name, the Coddling of the American Mind. And those last 2 books, have sections, or in the second case, The Anxious Generation, talk about the impact of social media and smartphones on the mental health, in particular of younger individuals. And I think about just the speed of information coming at people, and what seems like authentic, but in fact is often curated content. It's just hard to handle, right? And for you and me, we're not as active on social media as a lot of people, certainly younger generations. But I can't even imagine what that feels like, just the flood of information coming at you.
Right. The flood, not knowing what's true, what's not true. You sort of get out in your own world and your own bubbles. So I follow certain people on Twitter, and I assume, somebody who has different political leanings than I do follows completely different people. So you end up in your own world, and I try pretty hard to read what others are saying, just so I can sort of see how is this playing in a media universe I'm not a part of. And back in the day of CBS, NBC, ABC only, that's all you had. There were no corners to be in. And I feel like now people are in their corners and they're staying in their corners, which I think is pretty dangerous and not helpful to the democracy writ large.
This is an interesting point because social media taps into a basic tenet of human psychology, confirmation bias, right? So we click on something, we like something, and so forth, and we get more of that. The essence of confirmation bias. And so, I've heard this several times that we are a more polarized country than we have been historically, and it makes sense because for two reasons. One, social media is so prevalent and social media is built on confirmation bias. And that didn't used to be the case. I mean, there's good and bad about it, right? Like I think about the feeds that I get on Instagram, for example, and they're usually things that make me smile, right? They're happy kinds of things. But I also get fooled, right? I'll send my daughter Allie she's a marine biologist. And so there's these like pictures of this newly discovered creature that is super cute. And I'll send it to her and she'll say, Dad, that's AI generated. I'm like, really? It looks so real, And there's so much of that out there. It's just now I kind of look at it like, I don't know if this is, and I guess it's a little bit disheartening, right? I want to think these wonderful things are real, but they may not be.
And you want to think of yourself as someone who's highly educated, incredibly smart, incredibly discerning. And you think, if I'm tricked, what else is out there that I'm being tricked by or that other people are being tricked by? And so AI is a whole separate conversation, but it's incredible and amazing and scary all at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. And it is a tool, just like any other tool that can be for good or evil. By the way, I don't think about myself that way, but I appreciate you saying that. But yeah, I think about Chat GPT, for example. It's a tool that can be used for a lot of good. AI in general. We're talking a little bit about medicine in just a minute, and it's probably going to be the single biggest advancement in medicine that we've ever seen. And yet there are some negatives to it as well. I mean, I think to demonize the tool doesn't make sense. And so while we're talking about it, medicine, right? You said earlier that you are not in medicine, but in fact, you've already mentioned a few different ways that you are. One of the big ones is with the NFL, and we met because of the Super Bowl summit that was here in Las Vegas, which was this fantastic event where all, athletic trainers, physicians, medical staff for the NFL came together and talked about how they can help each other to help the players, which again was remarkable to me. And Navdeep Singh, as we talked about, he is the poster boy for this because he's so good about reaching out to other teams, and it is truly authentically who he is as a person. Can you talk about your role a little bit, and then about the NFL physicians?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will just say Dr. Singh is an incredible human being, physician. He's the chief medical officer for the Raiders, and is just a wonderful person who I partner with on another program that we can talk about in a minute. But what I do, so the NFL Physician Society is the group made up of the team physicians for the 32 clubs. There's about 200 doctors that are part of the society. And about 10 years ago, I was asked to work with them to help tell the story of what the team physicians do. And so I came on board and have been working with them on, we do stadium tours where I'll take media to a stadium before a game. I'll have the team physician and usually Dr. Sills, who's the chief medical officer for the NFL, who you know. And we'll do a tour where we show the media the technologies we use before, during, and after a game to make the game safer for the players. And we talk about the concussion protocol, and we bring them into the blue tent and show them how it is really quiet in there, and how you can have a exam of a player without all the noise and lights of the stadium. And so really, you know, to my point earlier about putting a human face on what we do and not just telling people what we do, but showing people what we do, has been critical in sort of telling the story of not only the team physicians, but the athletic trainers and the entire team behind the team.
It's, you know what, I'd never heard of the blue tent before the NFL Summit. And now every football game I see, professional football game I see, is the blue tent, where they go in, you know, if somebody is in a concussion protocol, they take them in there. And it's, yeah, it's one of these things that once you see it, you can't unsee it. But one of the things that has been really amazing to me, and I think Dr. Sills, as you mentioned, you know, he's out front, he's the leader of this. The community among the medical staff across the NFL, and the fact that even though the teams are competing, you know, as hard as they can, the medical staff is coordinating and communicating so that they can help out everybody. And the advances that the NFL has had across sports has been really remarkable from a medical perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the league and the physician society and work very hard to share data that we get, share learnings and information, and, you know, the research. The NFL spends millions and millions and millions of dollars on research for safer helmets, safer cleats, you know, all of the different ways to make the game safer, taking that knowledge and technology and sharing it with not only other leagues, but other levels of play, and working with coaches to, you know, teach kids how to tackle differently. So taking all of that and bringing it down so, you know, the next generation can play in an even safer way than the last generation. But with your point on the doctors sharing information, it's unbelievable how much camaraderie there is. You do think that, you know, there's all this, you know, the Giants and the Commanders, you know, are arch rivals. Well, yes, on the field, but when it comes to medical care, there's no rivalry, and they work together. They see each other's players. They give each other information. They'll call up, you know, the team doctor for the Raiders to say, you are an expert in X, Y, and Z. My player has an X, Y, and Z injury. You know, can you help me figure out like the best course of action? So they're really there to help each other. We also have a medical conference during the Combine in Indianapolis every February, where they share studies that they've done. They share data that they've gleaned, and really it's a real testament to their willingness, desire, and again, camaraderie to work together to take all of the knowledge that they have. And these doctors are the best and the brightest. I believe. I am biased, but you know, you'd have to be pretty top of your game to get one of these positions, and they really do work well together. And we've also started to work very closely with the other professional sports league physician societies, MLS, NBA, all of the leagues, to again share more information so we can work better together and more efficiently.
It's one of the things, to the point that you're making. I remember one of the studies that was presented was about the frequency of injuries at different times in the season, and which sounds so simple, right? But if you know, for example, one of the points that they made was that there are a lot of hamstring injuries, for example, that happen early in training camp, and that can be a chronic problem throughout the rest of the season. There are injuries that happen, different types of injuries that happen different times during the season. And you can then sort of track back to, oh, if you haven't been running full speed, this could be one, and then you go into training and you run full speed. This could be one of the reasons why you're having these hamstring issues. And that level of sophistication around the training and the recovery and how that has changed the way that they do OTAs, the way that they do mid-season conditioning, and it's been fascinating. And that information trickles down to the general population as well, to help with these things. Yeah, it's been really remarkable to me to hear this. The lead orthopedic surgeon for the Raiders as well, he fits into the same category as Dr. Sills and Dr. Singh and so forth. And just, it seems like they are some of the best, as you said. And I mean, it's a pretty prestigious position, but a lot of times in prestigious positions, you can get people who, maybe are more ambitious and driven by self than mission, but the ones that I've met so far have been driven by mission, as we've talked about before. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all of the doctors that I've met are driven by mission and are just the most compassionate, caring people I've met along my way.
I've got a couple questions, Amy, that these are questions I like to ask anyway, but for you specifically, I'm really curious about it. Your North Star. We've talked about it a little bit. I think I have a kind of general idea behind it, but what is your North Star, your driving force?
So I think my driving force has been the strong women in my life. My mother was a very strong woman. She got married later in life back then. She got married in her 30s, which was old back then, and worked. And I worked for other women like Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, and working for her and being her press secretary was an absolute honor and privilege, but she also showed me what it was like to be a strong woman in a male-dominated world of Washington. Being a mother, she has three daughters. Sort of how to, and watching her and all that she achieved gave me the drive to continue to do more and to not be kowtowed or nervous about, oh, that job should be for a guy, or, I can't do that job because I'm a woman. And so just, looking at, and I would say the last thing about Madeleine was she also did things because it was the right thing to do. And she wanted to make this world a better place. And as an immigrant, she came here with nothing and, left this world as one of the most celebrated women in American history. So I think about her a lot and, what would Madeleine do? And so she was a great mentor and motivator for me.
As you're describing her, which I'd like to hear more about this, but as you're describing her, I see the two of you having things in common. And when one of the ones that jumps out at me is doing the things because it's the right thing, as opposed to doing it to promote yourself or against something else or these kinds of things, which I think the level of commitment and courage that it takes to do that is substantial. Yeah. So while we're on the subject, tell me more about Madeleine Albright and what's surprising about her. How would you describe her? You've talked a little bit about what you've learned from her, but more on that, please.
Yeah. She obviously was absolutely brilliant. She just walked in a room and owned the room, and she was 5'3" maybe, although you never know that if you saw her on television. But she was also caring and kind. When I got married, she said to me, "Do you have something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue?" And I said, "Well, I don't have anything borrowed." And she said, "I'm going to lend you my daughter's something from her daughter." And it was her daughter's crinoline, which is this skirt you wear under a dress. And she didn't have to do that. She didn't have to go and crawl into her attic and get me her daughter's crinoline. But she was, sort of a girlfriend's girlfriend. I mean, when you were with her, she's funny and she was smart, and loved to eavesdrop on other people's conversations. So she was just a wonderful human being.
What do you think was surprising people don't know about her?
I think how funny she was. Madeline, when you saw her on television, you never thought of Secretary Albright as being sort of like a crack up kind of person you want to go have a, glass with.
That is true, by the way.
And she, I mean, she was wonderful.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they have their public persona, because you're negotiating, a nuclear deal with a country, and then you sort of, can kick back and be a fun person that people don't necessarily see every day.
What do you think was her driving force? Like if we asked her about her North Star, what do you think it would be?
I think it was her father, and being an immigrant in this country and fleeing Czechoslovakia during World War II. I think that was sort of her driving force, and to give back to the country that took her in.
So let's talk about Ted Turner.
Okay.
You had the opportunity, like this is a fantastic role model, by the way, a roll call of people that you've worked with. How about Ted Turner? How do you describe him? What was surprising about him, and so forth?
I can't remember how many years ago it was now, but the US owed $1 billion to the UN. And we were in arrears, and the government at the time wasn't going to pay it. And so Ted stood up at a dinner and said, I'm going to write the check for $1 billion. And his lawyers were like, what the heck? You can't write a check for $1 billion to the UN. So he decided to start this organization called the UN Foundation. And the UN Foundation funds programs for the UN, helps bring in private donations to the United Nations, and helps lobby the US Congress for the UN, since the UN can't lobby Congress because they receive funding. So I was hired by the UN Foundation to oversee the lobbying operation and communications operation, and to really help tell the story of what the UN does and how it helps the typical American. So Ted is obviously an incredibly generous human being. He has given, tens of millions, if not billions of dollars away over his lifetime. He also is funny and charming. I mean, it's no wonder he's been married so many times. And he's just a terrific human being. I was in New York City once, and I walked into a hotel, and I was going to check in, and I hear that he has a very distinctive voice and accent. And I hear, Amy, Amy. And I'm like, oh my God, that sounds like Ted Turner. And I turn around, and it was Ted. And he was just, have you been? And I haven't seen you in so long. And it had been probably 5 or 10 years since I'd seen him. And he just wanted to hear all about the family and how I was doing. And he's just a wonderful, brilliant man who has done so much, again, for this country, that people forget. Not least of which is his environmental work, and giving so much land back to the government and keeping it. So anyway, he's an incredible human being.
So let's talk about a few of the things that he has done. By the way, I am still sort of thinking about how many zeros you have to put on that huge check to be $1 billion that he would write. What are some of what you would say are the most significant contributions he's made to the country or the world?
I mean, I think, quite frankly, I think starting CNN was absolutely brilliant, and he did it at a time when no one thought it would go anywhere, and it's been, what, 45 years now, 40 years. I think his environmental work has been incredible. And I think the UN Foundation continues to do really important work. People might not know what they're doing and how they're doing it, but they're saving lives all throughout the world. I mean, they work on vaccine campaigns. They work on malaria campaigns. I mean, they do so much behind the scenes to help lift up the UN and help them do the job that they're doing. So I think he's saved millions of lives. He's an incredible philanthropist.
It's funny because I think about that, writing $1 billion check, saving millions of lives. these are things that are sort of almost hyperboles that people throw around, but it's true in this
Oh,
particular case. Yeah.
absolutely.
So Bill Clinton.
I've never met anybody who can take information, digest it, spit it back out in a more brilliant way. He is, like I said, he has a photographic memory. Every time I see him, and I don't see him that often, but when I do, I saw him recently, I ran into him somewhere and he said, "Now, how's your son Jack? What is he now, 28?" Like, I don't know how old Chelsea is. Like, I'm like one of hundreds of thousands of people that have worked for him over the years, but he literally has this brilliant way about him, that he knows you, he knows your family, he knows how old your kids are. He was great to work for. I found him brilliant and direct and really focused on doing what was best for the American public.
Yeah, it's nice to talk to you about the human side of public figures like this, and to get to have that insight, right? Because so many times we just see, almost all of us just see what's out in the public domain. We don't know the humanity that's with the individual. Anybody else special on that list?
I mean, I feel like I'm like name dropping. I mean, I would also say
You're not. You're being asked, please.
okay. I would also say Secretary Clinton is also an incredible, brilliant woman. I was able to work closely with her office when she was First Lady. When I was in the West Wing, she would, I worked closely with the East Wing staff. And I had actually interviewed to be her press secretary when she was in the Senate. And at the time, my mom called to tell me that she had lung cancer. And I realized I couldn't be a good mom, a good wife, a good, worker bee. And I said to her, I can't take this job. My mom was just diagnosed with cancer. And so every time I saw her, she would stop me and say, how's your mother doing? What's the prognosis? I know she would ask other people how my mom was doing because they would tell me. And she's just also another like unbelievably compassionate, caring person. And I think part of the reason I was brought into the East Wing, Hillary land, at times was because I was one of the few women in the West Wing who was a parent. And there were a lot of dads that worked in the West Wing, but not a lot of moms. And she, really brought me into her, side of the house as well. So she also has a special place for me.
Can you tell us a little bit the difference between the East and the West Wing, other than directional?
Yes. So at least when I worked there, and I don't know how it is now, but the East Wing was where the First Lady's office was. I don't know if the First Gentleman's office was there in our last administration. And then the West Wing is where the president and his staff work. A small portion of the staff work. There's also a lot of staff in the old executive office building, which is right across the street. So there's a handful of key staff that are in the West Wing, including a number of the press office. And that's where the press briefing room is as well that you see on television.
It's interesting. The shows like The West Wing and so forth. It's actually nice to hear from an insider what that actually means, like really means. Yeah. So, okay, we would be remiss if we didn't get some words of wisdom from you, Amy. Communication. From a communication perspective, what do you think are some of the things that are most important at all levels of communication? Because obviously we've talked about sort of the highest of the high levels, but it goes across the board. Personal communication, professional communication. So let's start with some of the things that we really need to focus on and pay attention, and then we'll go to some of the common mistakes that people make.
I would say that anybody in any industry could use media training. And I say this to people, not because you're going to go talk to a reporter tomorrow, but because you need to know what story do you want to tell, whether it's at the 4th of July barbecue or at a cocktail party or at your next gathering at work, but understanding what are the 3 key message points and what's your headline. And so thinking through that and having somebody help you think through it, it's much easier to have somebody else criticize you and give you immediate feedback. And so I always, I do media trainings during the combine in the morning before the doctors do exams on the players. I'll do, offer up media training sessions just so they can get comfortable with the key messages for health and safety issues, across the league. So it's something, it's, sort of like brushing your teeth. Like, you should just do it, and it's good to do. And maybe brushing your teeth isn't a good analogy, but you never know when you're going to need it. But it's always good to sort of have it in your back pocket and have it as an insurance plan later.
So are people generally in that kind of situation, are people generally receptive to media training?
Yes, they are. Some come kicking and screaming, and then they realize how much they learn and how much they didn't know, and that it just sort of helps you readjust how you think about whatever it is that you need to be speaking about.
So main points that you want to get across. I think you didn't say this, but I think that implied in that is what mindset or attitude you need to support those points as well in it. For example, if you were to walk into the White House press room with an attitude of arrogance, which you would never do, that's not going to go over very well. So yeah. So anything else, other things that you would suggest that those of us who haven't had media training need to keep in mind?
I also, when I talk to doctors, just generally understanding, even when you're talking to a patient, it's like doing a media interview, and you need to simplify. A lot of doctors speak in doctor speak, and the patients and their families are sitting there not understanding what they're saying, why they're saying it. They're too scared to ask a question, or they're too overwhelmed to ask a question. So thinking about how do you explain to a patient what their diagnosis is or what the next steps are and why, is also, media training is also useful for that, to help them be just have better bedside manners.
We're releasing a series of pre-op trainings. They're not really trainings. They're kind of conversations with a physician, and they talk about this idea of how can you prepare for a pre-op, right? It's a sensitive, emotional, and oftentimes nerve-wracking time that you're meeting with a physician prior to your operation. When we talk about things like how do you control your mindset, your arousal state, right? Breathing techniques, preparing questions ahead of time, bringing people in that can be of help to you, and so forth. From the patient perspective, but the other side of that is the physician perspective, just like you're saying, right? If you're a physician and somebody is already anxious about the situation, and you start throwing jargon around and seem that you don't have empathy, and I've done this 1,000 times, it's no big deal. Well, it's their first time, right? And so what you're saying is so very important to, we also know, of course, that if the person comes in, the patient has less anxiety about what's happening, they tend to have better outcomes as well. And so there's, in addition to the humanity of it, there's a medical efficacy aspect as well that becomes really important. I agree with you. I think it's so very important and something that so often is overlooked.
People don't think about it. I don't think that there's, media training in medical school. But there should be some sort of, and maybe you call it something else, but having help people be better communicators.
We have taught what's called communication excellence, but as I'm talking to you, I'm realizing that we could level up that program considerably, and something that I'd like to talk to you about offline as well. I think it's so important, right? And I think about people who come in oftentimes their most vulnerable situation, and if they don't have a person on the other side of the table who has that caring and understand what's happening, it makes everything even more difficult. And why would we put people in that situation? You know, I mean, so I think what you're saying, yeah, you're obviously exactly right about that. So I'm going to change gears for just a second.
Okay.
Moment of joy in your life. So when I say this, what comes to mind for you? What is a moment or moments of joy? And by the way, your son can only be one of those. So
How about my grandson? Can you count that?
I'll give you a second moment of joy for your grandson.
So I would say my son and my grandson. And I mean, my grandkids are they're delicious and I love them so much and they give me such joy. And it's so interesting to be a grandparent and have a different role both with your grandchild and with your child, and to see your parenting stays the same a bit, although now your child is obviously older, but being able to do things with your grandkids that you never would do with your own child. And you can see that happening. My other moments of joy, that's such a good question. I think, when I was hired by the NFL and the NFL Physicians Society, my dad was so excited. He was, unfortunately, he died. He was, as I mentioned, he was a general and vascular surgeon, and he was also a huge Giants fan. And I grew up not a sports fan, and could have cared. We had season tickets. I could have cared less. I mean, I would go because, there's something to do on a Sunday, but I didn't really care. And when I got the job, he was very excited when he and I could talk football. And mostly I could only talk football injuries. But it gave me so much joy because he was so proud that I got this position, and it was a good moment.
Yeah, I love seeing you tell that story because I can see the joy and the love coming back to you as you're telling it. It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us as well. So, what didn't we ask?
That is always the trick. I tell people when we're doing media training, they're always going to say, "What didn't I ask?" And if sometimes it's like skiing, and it's that one last run you take when you break your leg that you should have stopped at the question before. But I feel like you hit everything. Like I said, I've been very lucky in my life with great mentors. I mean, I would urge people to find a mentor. I know everybody talks about that. I've had incredible mentors my entire life. Being a mentor and a mentee is really important. I now mentor students at American University, and do it. I love it. That gives me joy too, is mentoring young people, giving them advice, giving them guidance, doing what I can do to help them along the way. And, I think taking when you're young and giving back when you're a little bit older is a really important life cycle.
We started this, Amy, with the idea of your story as we go through, and you just made me think about this. We started with clarity, courage, and conviction, and the story of Amy Weiss as we go through, which is, in many places it's this it's a fairy tale, right? Some of the things that you've gotten to do, the opportunities that you've had, the people that you know, and so forth. But your ability to stay grounded through the whole thing. And I think about, even though it seems sort of trivial, the camper award from the very beginning, and that little girl through all the things that you've done. If I'm summarizing the story, I think this idea of conviction clarity and probably maybe especially courage through the journey has been something I've seen over and over and over again. And I'm going to put another C in that, and that's contribution. And all of this with a sense of humanity that would be easy to lose in the experiences that you've had. Is there other things that you can tell me that would contribute to that story that I missed?
I really appreciate what you've just said. That's very kind. I also think humor is really important, and keeping your perspective. And in early in my career, I worked for a congressman who unfortunately died from glioblastoma, and handling the press around that, taking care of him, it really gave me perspective for the rest of my jobs and the rest of my career, and knowing that what I do is important and what I do is very important, but I'm not working on and taking care of somebody who has glioblastoma. And handling media around, because he was a very public figure, handling the media around his illness, his death, and the funerals that we had both here and back in Oklahoma where he was from. And so it's sort of everything, not that everything else doesn't matter, because it does matter, but I sort of use that as my way to sort of get centered if something is going wrong. Someone's misquoted, things, you do want to fix things, but you also know, like, no one's going to die at the end of the day. And having dealt with that, that sort of can keep me sort of focused and grounded on other things I'm doing. I take my job seriously, and I'm just not starstruck. Having worked, at the top levels of many different industries, I'm just not starstruck, and try to treat everybody the same and the way I want to be treated. So.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, I think the grounding and perspective that you just talked about is so, so very important. A lot of times we have issues that seem like really big issues, and it turns out in the grand scheme of things, they're really not. And to be able to hear from someone who has dealt with things at the level that you have, to have that perspective helps the rest of us kind of go, if she's thinking that, maybe we can too. So thank you very much for that. And thank you, Amy, so much for being on the program. This was fantastic. I love the fact that we get to talk about this in general, and just that we get to spend time together. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This has been a pure joy. So I appreciate. Usually I'd be like to the left of you in a chair behind the camera. So this was nice. Thank you.
You're welcome. So maybe next time I ask your moments of joy, this can fit into that list.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks.